Thank you, Vinu. A very warm welcome to you, Suman. It's a privilege and an honor because our past association, Business Standard and Mr. Suman Bery, has been very, very strong and long. There was a time when Business Standard's editorial pages would not be complete without Mr. Bery's very distilled views on the state of the Indian economy and the global forces at play. So it's a particular, a special moment that when we are celebrating the 50th year of Business Standards publication, and this is the final session of a two-day event, to have Mr. Bery amongst us, and he very kindly agreed. He normally does not go to these events, and we feel particularly privileged and honored to have him here. Thank you, Suman, for being here.
No, I have to say it's a privilege for me, but also a little alarming because I realize that of your 50 years, I've known you and the paper for half that time. So 25 years have just sort of slipped away. But no, I have the greatest regard for the standards of the paper. And for, since we're trading compliments, Ashok, your Ricina Hill columns are, I would say, on par with weekend ruminations that no longer exist. And, just by quoting those two bylines, you can see that I follow the paper very closely. And so I thought that this was an invitation it was worth rushing back from Bangkok for, because I arrived this morning.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for taking this trouble. Let me get into the issue today, which is we are looking at the Great Reset, India in a New World Order. As your introduction to this audience also talked about your global roles that you have played in the World Bank or in Shell, let me ask you, how diverse and complex do you see this global reset, or is it a global reset at all, particularly at a time when I find many columnists in different newspapers, and even in this forum here today, some people did express this view that this reset may not be a risk or a threat, it may be an opportunity. So what is your overall take on this global reset, whatever manner you want to describe it?
Well, as Zhou Enlai was famously quoted as commenting on the French Revolution, it's too early to tell. So I think that's reasonable. So if you would allow me, I'd make some comments about the US, which I've lived in for 25 years, or actually first encountered as a schoolboy in the 50s, and then talk a little bit about what any of this might involve for India.
Sure.
So, the story this story really begins with the US as the dominant power after the Second World War. And for whatever reason, they created a set of institutions, or the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, etc., out of enlightened benevolence. But let's be clear that any time this did not suit them, they felt able to change. And an early example of that was, of course, Nixon going off the par value, the Bretton Woods system. A second demonstration of that was, when Japan was dragged kicking and screaming under the Plaza Accord. What has been happening in terms of US treatment of the WTO. So the notion that the US has the privilege to reshape the rules of the game to suit itself is, I think, not unusual.
Sure.
I think slightly more intriguing is why the US feels beleaguered at this particular time, because, by most indicators, certainly compared to Europe and Japan, I mean, there's this American exceptionalism in technology, in markets, in innovation, and in growth and in productivity. And so, be that as it may, it suited, as it were, President Trump's agenda to suggest that the U.S. was in the gutter and he was going to fix it. I would make a related point,
Sure.
which is, I'm sorry for such a long response, but I just make the related point that it is also a goal of the U.S. I've already talked about them being willing to toss the rules aside when they felt they needed to, but also that the U.S. is very protective of its hegemony, as it were, or being top dog. And I think that that now being threatened, particularly by China, is what is new as compared to the earlier moments. I'll leave it at that.
Sure. No, I think I didn't want to stop you, but since you have taken a pause, let me add and just request you to reflect on this. The Chinese silence is, as the phrase goes, is deafening in the last few days. We know a little bit about how Russia is looking at the scenario. So there are various forces at work. US, you talked about the American exceptionalism. China, you do not know how they will react to whatever Mr. Trump does. And Russia, there will be reordering of relationship. How do you see this equation changing before we come to the impact on India?
Well, a little bit out of my depth because, I take an interest in it, but I don't follow these matters quite so closely. But coming a little bit more to the India implications and consequences, I think that a little bit in the way that the US at the time of Kissinger thought that driving a wedge between China and Russia was important, and that was what what he did. And of course, at the time of Bangladesh, and we suffered because of that. But equally today, I think it is in India's interest that Russia be freed from the Chinese embrace, and to the extent that is a possible consequence of the replacement of the Biden administration by the Trump administration, I think it's not all bad.
So that will that be a positive, favorable impact on India if Russia is taken away from the Chinese embrace?
I certainly think so, and I also think that, frankly, the Europeans have been a little unrealistic. I mean, Russia is an important European power, and to, as it were, assume that it can be ostracized forever, I don't think is realistic. But as I say, I'm now fishing in dangerous waters. It may be the case that the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, is still in Delhi, and so she may not appreciate my saying these things. But I'm saying that yes, I think that in a sense, re-establishing dialogue with Russia is by the US is probably a good thing for India.
The fact that so many of the trade commissioners from EU are in the capital, and we are looking at the possibility of an early trade pact with them before this calendar year ends, is probably a clear sign of that.
I would think so, yeah. I think as somebody who, as the introduction indicated, has been associated with the European think tank, and in contrast to what was being put out by unnamed sources, that there's a long way to go. The fact that in the declaration this afternoon that there was a clear commitment to wrap up the deal, and it's been going on, 15 years now? And may I also say, or point out, that quite unexpectedly, a similar long-running show, which was the deal between the Mercosur, and the EU, was concluded under von der Leyen's leadership. So these are the ways, I think, in which that Europe is beginning to create options for itself, and create some, firstly vis-a-vis China, and now to some extent vis-a-vis the US.
Okay, thank you. Drilling a little deeper into this issue, geostrategic affairs apart, if I were to look at the impact of the Trump order, on one side you have impact on immigration, and on the other side impact on trade and tariff. How do you see the impact on immigration? Are there opportunities to be exploited by Indians? And trade and tariff, how do you think we should really approach this path?
Ashok, I know that my colleagues in government are thinking about the bilateral issues, but let me just say that India, as the fifth largest, soon to be the third largest economy in the world, is very much impacted by global growth and global financial conditions, be it the dollar, be it US bond yields, etc. And so these indirect consequences of President Trump are as important for our policymakers to keep an eye on, because, amongst other things, two mechanisms. One is increased uncertainty is for sure bad for investment.
That's right.
Okay, globally. And what the world needs, because of the challenges of climate change and technology, is a big investment push. India needs a big investment push. And so to, as it were, clutter up the landscape with a lot of arbitrariness is not good for the global economy. Secondly, going back to what it was after the Asian financial crisis, there can be systemic flaws in the global financial system if you have too much volatility in either exchange rates or interest rates. Now, we know this is already exacting a hideous price on the least developed countries, the most indebted countries, but I'm talking about, a little bit like what happened with Silicon Valley Bank, etc. And international financial instability is also something that we need to worry about. So I would say that these global dimensions of, because I have to say that until now, these various policies are not internally coherent. I'll come back to that. But on your two issues, what was very intriguing about the statement of President von der Leyen today is that she talked very much about India as a trusted partner. I happened to be in Washington in 2023 at an event in the Peterson Institute. This was under the Biden administration, where somebody who had been in the national security staff said, look, we know that we don't have the manpower or even the resources to cut off our dependence on Chinese supply chains, but we are committed to doing it so that we can produce, so we have freedom of action. And that is what led to this ISET, the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies. Europe is going the same way. What am I saying? What I'm saying is that while physical cross-border movement may be, as it were, difficult politically, the notion that India's skilled manpower base will be an essential adjunct to both the European and the American economies to make good skills and talent that they don't have, I think that's a given. And I think from that point of view, irrespective of our position on Russia, Ukraine, etc., I think people feel that this is in many ways the only game in town. So you asked about immigration. You also asked about?
Trade and tariff.
Trade and tariffs. Well,
A lot of people say this is an opportunity for India.
Complicated, but India, as you know, was a fairly committed member of the WTO, by which I mean that we subscribed to the most favored nation principle until we found that the big boys were deserting us. It started with the customs union of the EU, which was a departure from MFN, and then the US itself joined up for NAFTA, and now since then we've had CPTPP and RCEP. These are the regionals. So we have had to respond to the fact that others have deserted, as it were, the MFN principle, the most favored nation principle. Now we have President Trump, basically saying all that's been negotiated on a most favored nation basis is harming the US. Incidentally, we had a similar situation like this with our negotiations with EFTA, the small group that includes Switzerland, where they felt that, they had already conceded so much on their existing tariffs that if they wanted us to lower tariffs, there was very little for them to give. And so, the two sides came up with this novel idea of 100 billion investment.
That's right.
So what I'm saying is that up till now, we have used the freedom of what's called, special and differential treatment for emerging markets to maintain higher tariffs than rich countries do, and we've been allowed to do that. But whether that has helped our economy is anybody's guess. And we were, in a sense, compelled in a different time to liberalize some of our tariffs after action taken by the WTO. And, frankly, if what we want is 7% growth and competitive growth, many of us believe that lower tariffs are one way of doing that. So it should not be presented, it should not be the case that we should do things only because it suits the U.S. We should we should use this pretext to do things that are in our own interest.
It's wonderfully said. I just wanted to sort of, talk about what the finance minister said yesterday, and she said that custom duty rationalization should be an enabler, and for domestic consideration. So I think what you're saying is also broadly you're hinting at that. Don't do it under pressure. But there's another thought on tariff and trade, which is how about linking tariff rationalization to investment commitments? I mean, after all, we all talk about trade and tariff, but often forget that there is a close, intricate linkage with investments. Now, is it possible to have a situation with the US particularly that yes, I am all right, I'm rationalizing a tariff, but can I link it to you invest? Because we do have a problem on foreign investment right now.
Well, I mean, the old rule book has been tossed out, as I have just indicated, and it's been tossed out with the return of industrial policy. But, you've commented on these things for so long that you know that there was a provision in the Uruguay round which set up the WTO called TRIMS.
Absolutely.
Tariff-related investment measures.
Yeah.
And it's explicitly prohibited under TRIMS. But, we no longer have an effective appellate body, and so everybody can do what they want. And I'm sure, and it's an important point, people talk about Trump playing fast and loose, but when I mentioned earlier that the US, kind of, while blaming India, junked WTO, the emasculation of the appellate body actually started under Obama. And it started because they began to realize that they'd made a mistake, perhaps, in admitting China into the WTO, and that a lot of the appellate body cases would go, and they wanted the freedom of action to do that. So anyway, that's a story from the mid-90s, and here we are in 2025, 30 years later. So what I wanted to say is that legally, and we still, worry about being WTO compliant.
Yeah.
I mean, the PLI scheme that I believe was hatched in Niti Aayog before my time, we were very careful to make it WTO compliant. The European Union, with its CBAM, is very concerned to make it WTO compliant. So, clearly, as I've said, the FTA did link somehow, but I think I think the thing is that we need, and the budget talked about this, we need to improve the investment climate in India, period, for our investors and foreign investors. And as you would recall from the budget speech, and this task is being taken up by Niti Aayog, we are actually doing a lot of stakeholder consultations to get a sense of what might constitute an index of investment friendliness.
That's right. I mean, I think it's the right time to get into what Niti Aayog is doing on different issues. I mean, I understand Niti Aayog is also involved in framing a kind of a national economic policy framework in consultation with the finance ministry, with states most probably. But can you give this audience a sense of how Niti Aayog is actually negotiating with the various challenges of the Indian economy? Like you talked about the index, and there are so many other indices that you have created. You have created even a list of sectors where there is need for asset monetization or asset sales. So there are various things you're doing. But can we get a sense of what you are really grappling with right now in terms of a policy framework of reviving a big challenge of reviving growth at a time when growth is probably showing signs of normalizing, if I may use that word?
Well, a couple of points. One is that I was flattered when the Prime Minister asked me to take charge also of the Economic Advisory Council after the unfortunate demise of a good friend, Bery de Broy. And I say that because while my instinct when I was writing for your paper was largely to write about macro, and that's what I did at the RBI, I had thought that Niti should focus on the structural side and leave it to the Finance Ministry, the RBI, and the EACPM to talk about the cyclical stuff. And indeed, if I can call it my job interview with the Honorable Prime Minister in 2022, he said, "आप दुनिया का तो काफी जानते हैं, अब इधर आप राज्यों का." No, and I have, actually been. I've been to Gujarat, Odisha, and Andhra in just the last 3 weeks. So there's a whole world there, and if you like, the resonance of the 4 years in Europe, or longer than that if I take my time at Bruegel, I actually tend to, as it were, draw analogies between the EU, because each one of our states is, most of them are larger than most EU countries. And so the diversity and the divergence amongst the states is enormous. 2 or 3 points on that interaction, and then I'll talk a little bit about national level issues. First, people don't accept that the transition from the Planning Commission to Niti Aayog was a great blow for decentralization, but it was. I mean, the fact of the matter was, and I understand Honorable PM was, upset as a chief minister that he had to go cap in hand to the Planning Commission. But, that's a tool that he forswore in creating Niti Aayog. And
Sure.
he, is very explicit. You have to persuade states by the power of your analysis, the power of your ideas. So, we have something called a state support mission, which helps create capacity, because what we found was many states wanted their planning ministries to follow the same trajectory as Niti Aayog, be more policy oriented, more, and so we are helping to support that. And then all states, as you know, all state chief ministers form part of our governing council meeting. And I do have to say that Indian citizens should not be cynical about their political leaders, because in the governing council, I see the chief ministers as extremely committed and shrewd development practitioners. I mean, obviously they have to do all the political things that they do, but at the end of the day, the notion that this collective is involved in the transformation of India, despite their political differences, is very, very encouraging. Now, to talk about the big issues facing the country, clearly getting a balance between what has been happening in higher education and meeting the aspirations of the people who have come out of our higher education system, and providing them with jobs of the kind that they feel they are entitled to, even if they may not. It's a giant enterprise, and it goes by the name of skilling, but it's a lot more than that. I mean, it's an enormous labor market with a very high degree of informality, and how you push all of this to a labor market system which encourages investment in training is, I think, an enormous challenge. It's not that the resources have not been put into it, but I think, I was just in Thailand, as I said, so all countries are finding this difficult, particularly because a lot of manufacturing is also becoming increasingly capital intensive. So I would say that's one issue. A second issue, and you've had the session here with Dr. Chand, I won't repeat that, but India is an agricultural tiger waiting to be unleashed. We are again stuck in, as it were, a model that saved us from hunger, but which now needs to evolve. If you like, shifting there's already a lot of risk in agriculture, so I don't want to seem hard-hearted, but I think that, as it were, putting crop agriculture and horticulture on more or less the same, on an even path. So there's a large agenda to be done in agriculture, including, and I'm sure Dr. Chand talked about this, in research and technology, and then bringing more women into the workforce, because put very simply, higher productivity means you get the same output for fewer workers. But if your labor force is increasing, then the only way you can absorb them is to grow faster, okay? And to employ more people. And our most underutilized resource is women. Now, PM has been on this from the very beginning, but, you know, and has been progress on female labor force participation, but that could be a huge kind of growth driver. And then, of course, you know, technology. And this is more, if you like, outward looking, well, both outward and inward, which is that for us to be at the technological frontier and to benefit from technology, a lot of which has to be embodied through FDI. I think that is a very important dimension of our trade agreements. And I was very pleased today that even Honorable PM himself, in talking to the Commissioner, talked about not just market access, but also the investment dimension. And you would have seen that in the budget, there was a willingness to look again at the bilateral investment treaties. So it's in this way that I would see the trade bit and the investment bit being addressed jointly through some of our negotiations.
That's right. You know, I mean, it has been such an engaging conversation that I didn't realize that we have already completed half an hour, which was allotted time. But it is such an engaging conversation. But I cannot resist asking you this question, that you did not touch upon the need for our probably reform in the healthcare system, and the second is factor market reforms, and if I may add, the climate challenges. So these are three things.
Well, I thought we were only at 15 minutes.
I know, quick thoughts.
Yes,
and
okay.
Then we'll take a couple of questions and then.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
okay, well,
yeah.
Look, climate, we are engaged in an energy transition for many reasons, but contributing to the global good of mitigation is one of them. The real issue, and this will come to the area where I believe, I think you're the expert, is that the fiscal challenge of financing adaptation while maintaining growth, and by adaptation I mean both chronic adaptation, heat stress, also disasters and all of that. This trying to maintain a growth rate and having the fiscal means for this is a big challenge.
Yeah.
On the energy transition side, financing is the big issue, and an issue I should have mentioned is that something I'm taking a personal interest is in what I call financing a big investment push, which is, I think that while we're doing pretty well in terms of our investment rate, if we want to grow at 7%, it's going to need to be raised. And the question of where those resources are going to come from is partly a question of public finance, partly a question of private finance. So on climate, I would therefore draw the distinction between the energy transition, which is wider than mitigation. I would also say that a very important responsibility of Niti Aayog, which is what took me to Thailand, is that we are custodians of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Right.
And a very important way we interact with the states is in encouraging them to drill down to local action for the Sustainable Development Goals. We also have the Aspirational Districts Program, the Aspirational Blocks Program. But your specific areas were, one was climate.
And factor market reforms, land, labor, and agriculture.
I think, I think we've come a long way in capital market reforms. Labor market reforms, look, many of these things are state subjects.
State subjects.
Yeah. And I would also add urban reforms. But, so it's for that reason that, being available to states when they wish to engage us, and also pointing out best practice becomes important. But there's no question that the biggest factor raising cost is the way our land markets work. Okay. Now, we have national laws on this, but states in general are coming up with their own schemes. And so I think it's more a question of encouraging them because clearly, unless land is available, industrialization of the kind that we want, and indeed, land is going to become a constraint even on solar power. And
that's right.
Labor, I think that whether labor market reforms are what are getting in the way of formalization is another discussion. But I would say that formalization of labor contracts or formalization of the labor force is important. And it's probably the labor laws that make medium and large scale enterprises shy of hiring more labor. And there's a paper that's referred to in the latest World Bank World Development Report contrasting the US, Mexico, and India, where Indian firms remain pygmies in terms of employment even over time.
Yeah.
And so addressing, and there's almost certainly a multitude of reasons for that, but I think we need, and states are going to have to act on this front. What I would say, Ashok, is that we must maintain the unity of India's labor market because we've got such different demographics. And so encouraging, even if it's seasonal migration, that remains one of very important. And it's tempting for state chief ministers to, in a sense, direct employment to their, to their own populations, but I think that that would be harmful.
I think that's a wonderful point you made, to maintain the unity of India's labor market, which is a big advantage,
Right.
competitive advantage. I think we have just time for 2 questions from the floor. Please be brief, identify yourself, and ask the question. Please go ahead. If there are mics, yeah,
No, I wasn't looking at the monitor.
yeah.
My name is Vineet Nahata. I represent Power Guild Treasuries. So you just mentioned financing of various green projects for biodiversity, climate change, maybe the other avenues. A main source of raising funds happen to be the green bonds. The Reserve Bank of India issues sovereign green bonds. Other than that, the corporates who happen to be investing in projects which are eco-friendly and which are green, they also raise bonds, raise money through green bonds. Green bonds actually are available, the interest cost over there is lower than the conventional loan rates. If a corporate can borrow at 7.5%, a green bond effectively he can borrow at 6% or so, 50 basis points lower. This 50 basis point spread we call greenium. Now in India, the greenium doesn't exist. So, overseas, there is a big market. My question is that what can be done to develop this green market so that foreign institutional investors come in a big way to tap the Indian markets in this particular segment?
Okay, good.
Okay.
Second question, I'll just take the second question and we'll... Yeah, please go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you for this engaging session. My name is Arumita Mitra and I run a foundation that works on South Asian issues. So, sir, we are a foundation registered under Niti Aayog where we are working on multiple issues. My question to you would be now, as India in a new world order, we are talking about bilateralism and multilateralism. Do you think that when we are talking about trade relations through bilateralism, we should also consider issues like South Asian issues as an Indian issues as well? Because I have seen while working in Vietnam and Singapore that labor issues, gender issues are quite similar like our country. So I would want to know your take on that, because it's not just the trade relations that develop the bilateral and the multilateral relations among the countries, but also the social development sector as well.
Okay. Again, time's up, so let me not be too long-winded.
No, that's not meant for you.
Okay. On your question, 2 or 3 channels of response. First, it is the case that some of the big players in green energy, I'm thinking of Renew, etc., seem to be able to borrow on their balance sheet. Okay? So there is a distinction, as I understand it, between, as it were, smaller players and the big established players, Adani and Renew, etc. Second, the work that Niti has been doing, which will be released in the next couple of months, and indeed this particular working group I'm chairing personally on financing requirements, indicates that so far most of the green investment is happening domestically. There's not a lot coming from abroad. My understanding is that the green bonds were meant to, amongst other things, attract ESG types of investment, but because there isn't that kind of, or the return is not adequate, I'm not quite sure, it's so far not really proved to be a way of bidding down the cost of funds. The third issue is over what time horizon. I mean, your needs and the country's needs are now, and I accept that, but actually larger development of the corporate bond market could be as effective. And part of this is going to require, in a sense, mobilizing more resources from deep pools of capital like the EPFO, like LIC, and this in turn is going to require government to, in a sense, become a little less conservative on, as it were, the portfolio requirements. The larger point is that we've had a system in India where, in effect, government has acted as a hedge fund, that it did a lot of the investment and it acted as a guarantor by both of deposits and also of bonds, because, and banks find that attractive. I think we've got to move to more assessment of risk, maybe in a pooled way, so that pools of investments can be offered in the bond market. It's not going to happen overnight, but I don't think green bonds are the only solution we should be looking for. On your point, as I said a couple of times, just back from Thailand, they're looking forward to the BIMSTEC summit, and they're very interested, for their own diversification, to have a deeper relationship within India. I think we have a lot to learn from them, for example, in tourism, but I think you were talking more about social issues and social sectors. Look, Thailand is 60 million people. A thought that crossed my mind was, what would be the right state to twin Thailand with? Okay? Because the scale is so different, you talked about Singapore as well, that it's really a question of, what is it that Tamil Nadu or Karnataka can learn from Thailand? What is it that UP might be able to learn from Indonesia? Because, a population of 200 million or a population of 60 million, there's more likely to be transferability between those two. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Suman. It was a wonderful masterclass it was on the state of the global economy and its impact on India, and what Niti Aayog is doing to face up to these challenges. I think these are all takeaways and learnings. This session, as I told you, is the final session, but it is not yet over. I'm now honored to invite our editor, Mr. Sailesh Dobal, onto the stage and give his closing comments, and then we will have a small memento presented to you. Mr. Dobal. Yeah.
Thank you, Kiwi, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What a 2 days it's been, In the course of the last 2 days, we've had 18 sessions and over 31 thought leaders and doers, much like Dr. Bery here. The variety of participants on display, they were top government policy makers, they were businessmen, bankers, technocrats, startup founders. And true to Manthan's moniker, which is India's premier thought leadership summit, there was ample food for thought as far as thought leadership is concerned. On day one, we had the Honorable Finance Minister, and she explained how multilateralism is on its way out, how bilateralism is now topping the agenda, how MFN is almost dead, both from the perspective of trade and geopolitics. The Environment Minister, Mr. Yadav, espoused the idea of tech transfers between global north and south in order to tackle the challenges of climate change. We had veteran banker, founder and director of Kotak Mahindra Bank, Mr. Uday Kotak, giving a clarion call to India Inc. to aspire for creating a global consumer brand out of India in the next 5 years. A top bureaucrat and PM's principal secretary, Mr. P.K. Mishra, shared how policy intent in many areas is to make India not just a resilient economy and polity, but almost like an empty, fragile one. We had a thought-provoking session with the defense experts, and it was heartening to learn that technology is now flowing from the private sector to the public sphere in defense. India's G20 Sherpa, Mr. Amitav Kant, who was with us yesterday, warned us of the dangers of letting the young believe that a developed country's status can be achieved without hard work. On the tech front, we had HCL's co-founder and Indian Quantum Missions head, Mr. Ajay Chaudhary, and he gave us a new moniker, for a better word, in tech sovereignty. And he explained how Atmanirbharta here means that country has to be resilient in semiconductor and quantum computing. We had a scintillating session with the market guru Samir Arora, where he virtually said that the long-term capital gains is a bad idea. It doesn't matter which economy is it in. There was Future of Jobs panel, where the participants argued that the augmenting effect of technology, much like AI, on jobs will be far greater than the elimination element. In our last validatory session, Dr. Bery started saying it's too early to tell whether the Great Reset is on us or not, but he also said that the old rule book has been tossed out. And the sum of substance of how I can briefly put Dr. Bery's enlightening session is how across trade, tariffs, and immigration, the underlying trend across the Atlantic is that India is a trusted and a valuable partner. Hope you found these 2 days enriching and time well spent. We'll be back for Manthan next year again. Till then, goodbye and a very big thank you.